Hello, I'm Danielle Smith with Alberta Enterprise Group. We are collaborating with Common Sense Edmonton to interview candidates for the upcoming civic election on October 18th. The wards have changed quite a bit. In this particular ward, it is now numbered Ward 8, but it contains a bunch of pieces from different wards, and it also has a new name. So joining me from that ward is Susan Field. Susan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. So tell us the name of your ward.
It is papastew.
And what does that mean?
It is the name of a Papache's chief from years and years ago. The lands that we are currently on, south of the river in Edmonton, were the lands where the Papache's people occupied. And then over time, they were forced to sign Treaty 6, and they were kind of pushed out of the area. And so the new ward name is in honor and reflection of that situation.
All right. And I know just for educating people, because this one is a bit of an amalgam of a bunch of different wards. Did you want to just sort of explain that so people know that you're their candidate?
So I'm going to give you the outline of the ward, which will mean nothing to you, but it could to somebody watching. And that would be, so it is north from 34th Avenue to the river, then from the White Mud Creek to Mill Creek. That's the easiest way to describe the actual geography. We are 5 neighborhoods from Ward 10, 5 neighborhoods from Ward 8, and 3 neighborhoods, I believe, from Ward 11.
All right. So are there common issues that bind everybody when you're going door to door? Tell me, what are the top 3 things that you hear?
You know, that what has been the most amazing part of my campaign. So I spend every day going from neighborhood to neighborhood, okay? And the issues are exactly the same in our ward. So our ward is a mature neighborhood. The newest home in the neighborhood that isn't infill would be the late 1960s. Okay, so everything would be turn of the century to 1960. The number one issue that people are telling me is they don't feel the engagement with the city is genuine, and that the city has its own plan in mind and doesn't care what the neighbors want, which actually was one of the reasons I was running. I just didn't expect it to be universal.
So the consultation issue is really important. So what are the specific things that you would do differently if you got elected? What are they telling you they want to change?
Well, the surveys, for example, that go out, the community engagement surveys, are predetermined. Mm-hmm. That's how they feel, and that's how I feel. So we'd make sure that wouldn't happen. Having regular meetings with your neighborhood. And I understand councillors, because they've gone on this new municipal or city plan themselves, find it very hostile to go. But I've been beat up by bigger boys. So I would go to neighborhood engagements on a regular basis. So that's our first issue. Okay. The second issue, which did surprise me, was although I know our transit system is just absolutely has been decimated this year, not because of COVID. They put in a privatized solution and it's a disaster. That seems to be the biggest, another big issue. And the third one is the taxes not being used properly. But there's a fourth one: businesses. Businesses do not find this city, Edmonton, business friendly. They find it very unfriendly and not predictable.
Can you talk to me a little more about the transit issue? It's the first that it's been raised with me. What is going wrong with it?
So we had this big LRT project. And it's an ongoing project. And the issues with the LRT for me and our citizens is that before COVID, 30% of our workforce worked in the core of the city. However, 100% of our LRT goes to the core of the city. So we weren't servicing the other areas of the city to begin with. And so we had low ridership, right? So instead of looking at why we had low ridership, we just discontinued neighborhood buses in April of this year. And we said, we'll go to an on-demand system. The on-demand system is a complete failure. So we have big blue buses in the city of Edmonton, then we have little blue buses, same as all cities. Now we have little teeny tiny white buses that seat probably 8 to 12 people, but they don't have routes. So they sit in parking lots and they wait to be called on demand. So within a 1.5 mile area of my home, I can, at any time of the day, 4 to 6 of these buses are sitting in parking lots. One day I saw a guy doing yoga, one of the drivers doing yoga, because he has nothing to do, right? So, and I have a solution for this, by the way. So
yeah, tell me, what is it? What do you think should be done instead?
Well, one of the issues with this on-demand system is you cannot take and pay. You cannot take a ticket. You can't use your pass because it's like a privatized system. You must download an app and you must create an account to use this bus. Therefore, we have eliminated accessibility to transit. Seniors that no longer drive can usually use bus services, right? They can't download an app. The number of seniors that pull out a flip phone and say, I can't do this. Group home members that travel all throughout the city for work, they can't do it. Essential workers, they can't do it. So it's a real simple solution because we're stuck with this 2-year contract, right? Put these buses that are running with a driver in them, put them on a route. Bring the routes back. And if we don't know what routes those are, let's sit this real cool focus group down called bus drivers and ask them where they think the issues are in the bus routes. We have all this data, but the data didn't work. Let's go back to the boots on the ground and ask them, hey, where should we put these routes back? I can give them 10 different routes for these buses that are sitting in parking lots doing nothing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. I appreciate it. Let me ask you a bit more about your history. What kind of things have you done in your personal life, your career life, your volunteer life that makes you believe that you'll be a great council member?
Well, first I'll give you just a little tidbit of my personal history. So I was born and raised in the ward. My family has over 80 years history in the ward. My dad was raised in Ritchie, which you wouldn't be familiar with. My grandparents had a home 53 years in Park Allen. I was raised in the Aspen Gardens neighborhood. My sister lives next door in Greenfield. My parents still live in the neighborhood. So I have a really strong foundation in this neighborhood. Okay. So I have tons of community experience, which seems to be what most council candidates have. So I've got lots of that too. I created a program called Nosy Neighbors 13 years ago after there was a horrific violent crime in our neighborhood. And people want to arm themselves and they want to have patrols in the middle of the night. And I thought that was really dangerous in 2008. So I designed a program called Nosy Neighbors. And it's a community connection and crime prevention program. So we got our neighbors out in the hood more, walking and talking and socializing. And it was a very strong effort to do that. And we noticed we started to have this neighborhood that was so much fun to live in. But the other thing we got was crime prevention from that. So 90% of neighborhood crimes are often crimes of opportunity. So we reduced the opportunity for the crimes. And I've been running that since 2008. So that's my community piece, okay? Part of my community piece. I've worked in lots of nonprofits, in lots of charitable organizations. So in my business career, I spent over 15 years with Big Iron Drilling. And in there, I did everything from sales, management, strategic initiatives, capital budgets, capital projects, project management, process management. Those were really big for me to do. And the city council seems to be lacking in that. Then I also worked about 15 years, a little over that, with a company called Tab Products of Canada. And they are a change management company migrating paper records into technology. Okay, so you're usually working in an environment where you're trying to update and become more efficient. Okay. They were many capital projects. And one of my largest clients was the city of Edmonton. So I can see the inefficiencies, and I have great ideas on things to streamline business processes and capital projects so we don't spend the money we're spending. And we also get some happiness back in our workforce.
Well, let's talk. Can we talk about some of those things? Or is there more that you want to, because I think that's a good transition to talking about how you would go about doing that. So let's talk high level first, and then we'll get down into the granular, because one of the big things you'll have to do is approve budgets. And so there's a spending side, and there's a taxation side, and then there's also operating and capital. So let's begin by just looking at the overall level of spending. When you look at what the city is spending, is it too much, too little, or is it about right?
So I'm kind of that expert-based kind of person. So the city auditor provided us a 3-volume report last fall on what we needed to do. The city auditor, we should kind of do what he says or prove him wrong, right? So he said our tax burden is too high. We're relying too much on residential and commercial property tax to foot the bill, and it's not sustainable. He said that. I'm not saying that. I'm going to believe him because I can't disprove him. Okay. So I think we have to look at ways to decrease that tax burden by diversifying our revenue. We don't have to go and charge more. We don't have to get outside of our lane, which seems to be a bit of a new thing for the city of Edmonton. They kind of got out of the municipal government lane and are working in other areas. So something as simple as transit. We have no revenue from transit. So that's adding to our tax burden. We still have the original cost, but we're not bringing in any revenue. Get those little white buses into the neighborhood, Danielle, and we'll get some revenue back, right? Simple things like we want to privatize our rec centers. Well, if a private company can make money off of city services, and those are city services, maybe the city should just try to break even. Something as simple as our rec centers, most of them don't have daycares in them. In the new neighborhoods they're in, they're crying for daycare. We don't want to undercut any private business. Maybe we want to invite private businesses to bid on the daycare spaces in there. We have no seniors programs that would offset revenue and provide another core service. We don't have multicultural programs. Most multicultural groups are pushed into church basements. I want that diversification within our community. Bring it right out into the open, have multicultural groups in our rec centers, right? We don't have any accessibility programs except a couple ones for swimming. Let's have some more programs in the rec centers. When we build a rec center, we should be partnering with our libraries. We need to have our rec centers as community hubs that are vibrant places. Some of our libraries are doing social work. Then let's make that part of our community hub. All of those things cost us no money, increase our revenue, decrease our tax burden. That's what the auditor asked us to do. None of those things cost us money, and we stay in our lane of providing core services and not going out of our lane into businesses.
All right. Great examples. Let me ask you about a couple other things that came from the auditor's report on the spending side. They took a look at the level of managers, for instance, and found that middle management increased by 22%. Supervisors increased 19% since 2017. Do you think they're spending money in the right place, or do you think that's a sign of a problem?
That's a sign of a big problem, a huge problem. And in that report, if you take that into consideration with the other operating expenses in HR, we've actually decreased our workforce. We've just increased our management. I think that's a bad direction. We need more boots on the ground. We do not get our permits and developments through in a timely manner. That whole department is broken. We don't need more. We don't need more managers. We need more workforce.
All right. Let me ask you about, so we're talking a bit about how we address management. There's sort of two other aspects to the wage, salaries, benefits that we have on the city budget. So managers is one, frontline is another, and then council is a third. So let me ask you about council compensation. Do you feel like council's paid fairly, or do you think it needs to be reduced?
Well, if we're going to ask our workforce to take a reduction, we'll have to reduce our wages too. It's that simple. You cannot walk the walk and not talk the talk, right? Like, I mean, you have to do that. However, if the third party that we have says we're fairly paid, fine. I don't think we need to have a decrease in wages in the city. I think we need to have it redistributed. I am very concerned about the number of middle managers and managers, and either we're going to have to look at reducing those, which is what the city auditor said. I think he said 30 managers that have no reports, 300 more managers per capita than we had before. We really need to take a look at that. And people do retire. And if you're a senior manager, you better have enough skill sets to move across the board into a different department. If not, that's a big problem for me. I've worked in completely different industries my whole life, but as a manager, you have a similar skill set that you bring to each organization. What you're doing is really like an ice cream stand. One week you're selling vanilla, the next week it's chocolate, right? And so I think those managers are going to have to be held accountable for the fact that we are having so many inefficiencies in our system.
All right. Let me ask you about the we've talked about operating. Let's talk about capital for a bit. So the Valley Line Southeast has suffered a bunch of significant delays during construction. There's a number of other LRT extensions being planned: Valley Line West, Metro Line Northwest, Capital Line South. So a couple questions there. First one is, do you think that this is the right way to be building out public transport, by investing in LRT, or do you think that there does need to be a more of a focus on the kind of transit options that you mentioned earlier, or is it both?
Well, we do get quite a bit of capital funding from, say, the federal government, so there is that to look at. But we have the same problem, project after project after project, with the LRT. We have the front end that hasn't planned. So from a capital project or a project management standpoint, you as a project manager need to be able to anticipate the problems that you're going to be seeing within those projects. And quite frankly, the city has never done that. But we now have lots of experience in the catastrophes that the LRT causes, right? I understand the Valley Line's going to go further south, but the current design is that it's going to stop at all the lights. Well, why are we going to spend all that money to stop at all the lights when we could have a nice rapid transit program for maybe a tenth of the cost? We have to start looking, Alberta's in a horrible financial situation, economic situation. Generally, we've got a horrible problem in our economy, bigger than the city of Edmonton. But the city of Edmonton has to stop looking maybe at gold-plated solutions and looking at solutions that are very economically viable. So when it comes to transit, we're heading down south as far as you can go, almost the airport, maybe. But we can't get from west to east on the south side or the north side of the city. So you go from West Edmonton Mall to Millwoods, 2 hours. 2 hours. I can drive there in 15 minutes. Okay. You can't go from the east side of the city, south to north, north to south, west side of the city, north to south, south to, just not part of it. We have to remember that before COVID, 70% of our workforce did not work in that core. Post-COVID, those LRT trains are empty. With the new hybrid model of working in the future, I'm not even convinced we're going to see it come back. But we have to start looking at who's been running our city for us and our province in the last 18 months. And are they going to continue doing it? It's our essential workers, Danielle. They can't get to work. They don't have neighborhood buses. Those are the least paid employees in society. The more affluent neighborhoods I go to, people are working from home. The less affluent neighborhoods I door knock, they're out in the workforce. We have to take a look at what is possibly 90% of our workforce not being able to get to work.
You're sort of making me think there needs to be a complete re-engineering of all of the routes and all of the different options. I don't have you seen anyone do that successfully? But you've persuaded me. How would you go about doing that?
Well, we're not a huge city. We're 1 million some people, Danielle. We're not walking around having to reinvent the wheel. There are many cities nationally and internationally that have successful transit programs. I cannot answer why we don't. I do think that we have this problem with taking data and not checking it. And I can't say that for sure, but I'm like, who would have thought it was a good idea in the middle of a pandemic to stop our essential workers from getting to work? And we did it in April, which is fine because they can walk half hour to an hour to the closest bus. Are they going to do that in Edmonton in January and February? I don't want them to. That's just unfair. I think we have to have a complete rework. We have to have a multifaceted approach to transit. We have to stop looking at 100% of our infrastructure going to the core being LRT. There are many different facets to transit and transportation, and we seem to be failing on all fronts of them.
All
and
right.
I think that a multifaceted approach is the solution. So
you've talked about the economy. And so I want to ask you a bit more about what your approach would be, because there are lots of ways to do business attraction, and you can do tax cuts or tax holidays. You can do business development zones. You can reduce permits, licenses. You can set aside money for business attraction and give direct grants or subsidies. What kind of approach do you favor?
All of those, but let's start with, an attainable piece. Okay. Our permitting department is taking far too long. So as I'm door knocking, I'm expecting that it's like 10, 15 weeks, right? I haven't met anybody who has been able to get a business permit in less than 16 weeks. That's more than a season. We have entrepreneurs that want to open businesses, want to hire employees. That has to be streamlined immediately. The city auditor's report talks about 19 less permits being given out per full-time employee. I talked to a fellow and he had waited 10 weeks in the city of Edmonton to open his business. And so we went to Sherwood Park and he was open in 4 weeks. Then I asked him, okay, so what happened with your business permit? And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, well, I didn't pull it. And I said, so? And he said, well, I'm now at 20 weeks. And I went, what? He said, I'm at 20 weeks. I talked to a coffee shop owner. She had a coffee shop. She was opening a second one. She illegally opened her second one at the 12-month mark because she said bankruptcy was not an option. She would take the fine. She said, I already run a coffee shop. I know the rules. She got it at the 20-month mark.
My goodness.
That's appalling. That is completely appalling. We have to be attracting business to this city. And if they can't get up and running, and if we're that difficult to deal with, there's no consistency in our rules. They say there are, but there is not. And that's what business owners are telling me. Our taxes is not predictable. And businesses work off plans. Ina, we worked in our business off a plan. If we don't know if that is a variable cost constantly in your business, that's not okay. The mill rate versus the tax percent increase, it hides high percentage increases for businesses. I had one business owner, he's not in my ward, show me his last 4 years of taxes. 4-fold increase, Danielle. How do you get a business to be successful?
Thanks for giving all those examples. They're awesome. Let me ask you about the kind of business opportunity that you think there is for business attraction. So first of all, just give me your sense of the energy sector. Do you think there's still good jobs to be had in oil and gas? Leduc is not that far to the south and has been a source of good paying jobs. Do you think there are still going to be good jobs in that industry in the future?
There are good jobs in that industry. The thing that I think people forget, first, my daughter works in the industry. My son works in solar energy. Okay. So my family built all our livelihoods off the energy industry. Okay. Cousins that owned oil drilling companies. So, we know how important that is to the economy. However, if you talk to the multinationals and the large players in the industry, they're already planning to diversify their business portfolios. The city and the province can talk about oil and gas because it's not going anywhere, but it is decreasing over time. We need to be on the bandwagon with the big boys in the industry. If they're starting to migrate to hydrogen, we want to have that hydrogen plant right here in Edmonton, which we're doing. If we're going to be part of the wind energy, Edmonton could be attracting the turbine manufacturers. We have solar industry that's just burgeoning left, right, and center. We have recycling and compost is a wave that Canada, let alone Edmonton, hasn't even looked at. So we take a lot of our plastics, we put them on a truck, send it to Vancouver, put it on a high carbon footprint barge overseas where they have no labor laws, no environmental laws, no occupational health and safety. We manufacture something out of that plastic, pop it back on that high carbon footprint barge, bring it back here, and we buy it and say, aren't we good stewards of the environment because we're using a recycled product? I think we have 2 plastic manufacturers in Edmonton. Why are we not trying to attract recycling to our province, to our city? Edmonton has empty, so does Calgary, empty industrial parks. We need to be forward thinking in how we're going to be attracting business. The oil and gas sector has so much talent and they all want jobs. They all want to be a part of it. Nobody wants to get out of the energy industry. Let's stay in the energy industry. Let's just make sure we're on the front line of that wave. We're not staying back drowning.
All right. Thank you for that. Now, since you've got some understanding of solar with your son's connection to it, I'm wondering if you've had any conversations about the solar project in the River Valley that was approved by EPCOR. It was very controversial when it was approved, only a 7-6 vote. What would you have done if you had to make that decision?
I would have voted against it, but not against the entire project. I would have voted against the location. Our river valley is green space. It's beautiful. We have so many derelict areas that could have been put on. We have lots of cement areas that could have been put on. We have to be forward thinking again. We have to anticipate what's the long-term cost when you destroy the river valley, right? Oh, wow, it might be convenient, but no, it's not convenient. It all goes back onto a grid anyways. So let's take that project and help EPCOR find a location that is more valuable. So I like to have solutions if I'm going to vote against something, I want to have a solution. So my solution is put it in a different location. I'll help them find that location.
All right. Let's talk a bit about housing. When we talk about affordable housing, what does that mean to you?
Affordable housing to me is kind of twofold. In the city, the city proper, people talk about it interchangeably with first-time home buyers and homelessness, and they're different. So I'm going to talk about new home buyers first for affordable housing. In our ward, we were told that infill housing would be affordable housing. And in fact, it's created the exact opposite problem. Okay, so you take down a $400,000 or $450,000 house in my neighborhood and you put up 2 $1.3 million houses. Mm-hmm. That's no longer affordable. It's really not much for densification either. You're adding maybe 3 people into the area. The homes currently have no architectural controls on them. So a lot of them look like 3 sea cans on top of one another, okay? And it really pits neighborhoods against new neighbors, and that's not welcoming. I think we need to do a first-time home buying in transit corridors so that we're encouraging those families to develop no or one-car lifestyles so that they can save money to develop new businesses, to move to other areas. The first 5 years of my life, my dad was at university, and we lived in what was called low rentals. I don't know what else it was called. And it was by the Southgate area, big cinder block townhouses. That allowed my dad and mom to get my dad through university and for them to save some money and buy the one and only house they bought. And they still live in that in their mid 80s, right? So to me, affordable housing is extremely important, and it should be focused on transit corridors, and it doesn't have to be single family housing.
All right. Fantastic answer. Let me ask you about another development because the city has the former airport area, the Latchford lands, and they've taken on the role of a developer. It's been fairly controversial about the lack of apparent progress. Do you think that should just go ahead as originally envisioned, or do you think that it needs a different approach?
That's a huge, huge problem. Okay, so first I'll start with, if we can't do transit and waste and rec centers right, what makes us think that we can do a full-size city like the size of Leduc or Spruce Grove, right? That we can be the general contractor for that. I think they should have taken the expertise of urban municipal planning, right? Taken that expertise from the city and worked as part of a stakeholders group. But this idea that we have the capacity to deal with it, they screwed up right from the get-go. Okay, they didn't look at the contamination. It was an airport, Danielle. There was going to be contamination. That didn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. Mind you, a rocket scientist would have known there was contamination there, right? So I had the opportunity in private business to look at those geothermal wells and bid on them. When I found out that the city was going to be the contractor, we backed away. We could have, as a conglomerate of drillers, gone in and done those geothermal projects. But, you need to be working with, even as a business, in a way that you make money and survive. And it's very difficult to do that when you've got lack of expertise running a brand new city project.
All right. Let me ask you a sort of broader question about development, because there's always the tension between, do you densify in the inner city where there's larger lots, where you have infrastructure, or do you build out with new greenfield where you can do greater density but you have less infrastructure? What's your basic approach on that?
Well, I would like us to see some densification first. We have schools in different neighborhoods that are closing because they don't have enough residents. We have neighborhoods that are very derelict, on the verge of being a ghetto. I think we need to be, as a municipality, we need to be business friendly and development friendly. If we're going to have to wait a few years for all the homes to become available, or work with those current residents that are basically, or landlords that have derelict sites, we need to be focusing our efforts on densification where there's transit corridors. But since we only have one transit corridor, that's going to be difficult. To me, that would be our goal first. Take our derelict neighborhoods. We have this beautiful neighborhood downtown off of Jasper Avenue called Railtown. It's this big, beautiful, gated community, and it's not really gated as in private. It's set up to be this beautiful 15-minute city, right? That's what we need to be aiming for in our densification. Family friendly, where all the kids get to play outside, there's a school nearby, there's groceries nearby, medical services nearby. And currently we're not focusing on that in our mature neighborhoods or in our derelict neighborhoods. And I think we've got to concentrate there. I don't have a problem with new development, but let's incentivize, is that the right words? Let's give incentives to builders and developers to look at those neighborhoods within the city and get them to build there.
Okay, you've already talked quite a bit about an alternative approach to policing. I appreciate that. I just wonder if you want to comment on the defund the police movement and what you think we should learn from that.
So helpseekers.org is a federal government data group out of Calgary, by the way. They released a report, I think it was in the spring, saying that the city region, not the city of Edmonton, but the city region spends $7.5 billion on social service supports. $7.5 billion. The city of Edmonton police get $590 million, and back alley repairs in the city budget is $290 million. So I don't see that our police force is overfunded. What I'm asking is, where's the $7.57 billion going? I want to see a detox center that's attached to a rehab facility, that's attached to post-rehab counseling, that's attached to a job-seeking program. I don't see any of those things in that $7.5 billion we have. So when it comes to defunding the police, the police need to be able to get back to policing, and I'm worried that they're not able to do that. My community connection program involves zero police dollars. It involves zero police. It's about empowering the neighborhood to change the crime in their own backyard, actually literally in their own backyard. Okay. The homelessness situation, that is all part and parcel to that, right? Yeah. And so defunding the police, I just don't see that it's applicable in this environment.
Okay, a couple quick questions. 40 km/h speed limit now in residential zones. Do you support that?
So we have 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100 standard speed limits in our city. This was not the time to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to do it across the board. This seems to be a recurring theme with the city of Edmonton. One size fits all. It's the same in zoning. It's the same in speed limits. There are many neighborhoods that need 30 kilometers or 40 kilometers. But this idea that we put a blanket stamp on all neighborhoods when many of them did not need that or require that just cost us millions of dollars.
Okay, let me ask you, I'm looking at a picture right now. It's a bit of a fun one. It's a picture of the think tank library downtown. So do you love it or do you hate it?
Yeah, because I live in a mature neighborhood, it really doesn't fit into the design of our neighborhood. So the big think tank, the big gray building, it has some amazing programs in it. Okay, the architectural design, I don't want to really comment on it. The thing that I love about that new library, they have 3 social workers that work in it. Okay. The other thing that I love about the Edmonton Public Library, or EPL, which is one of the meetings that I went to this week, is everybody was asked by the city of Edmonton during COVID to give back money they didn't use. The EPL pulled deep in their pockets and gave money back. So I can put up with an ugly building when I think the organization is run tickety-boo. I think they're forward thinkers. They're looking at underserviced communities where children are not getting proper before school education. They're looking at after school programs that help our marginalized communities. So it's an ugly building, I agree. But I think the services outweigh the appearance.
Perfect. Okay, just 2 final questions. Just about the role of the council member. There's going to be a couple of referenda in the fall on daylight savings and on equalization. Generally speaking, do you think more votes should go to the direct vote of the people, or as the elected representative, do you think you should make those decisions yourself?
Well, if we start listening to the citizens as a council instead of just the administration, I don't believe we have been listening to the citizens. We might not need referendums. A good example was our arena project. There was no referendum on that. It was a $475 million expense the city went ahead and made without a referendum. I think that's pretty big. I think that, huge projects like that, if we don't have some kind of input from the city other than a handful of people standing up in front of council saying they like it or they don't like it, I think that we need more engagement. And if the referendum is going to be it, fine, but we need to be working together to get consensus on council. And we don't seem to be doing that currently.
Okay, and if a decision came down where the city administration was recommending one course of action, but your ward residents wanted you to vote a different way, what would you do?
I would pick my ward. The reason I do is that's one of the reasons I'm running. I don't believe currently council actually knows what the people in the city want. We have these huge screw ups when it comes to money and direction and bike lanes. Nobody hates bike lanes, but now people are being bullied because they're saying, that bike lane there that has 130 signs on how to use it and a torturous pathway, it's like a roller coaster to use. Nobody wants to use it. We need to have projects with purpose. We need to have some common sense. Okay, I just think I stole your line there, but we need to have some common sense on council, right?
All right. Thanks so much for the conversation today. I sure appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, my pleasure. That is your candidate, Susan Fields. She's the candidate in Ward 8, Papastew.